Our third kind of closure is subject to subject closure. We're still on one idea. Basically, it increases the amount of reader involvement. That's number 3 here, as you can see on page 71. This one takes a little bit broader leaps, for your mind to make between panel to panel, in the gutter. And it is pretty common, again, one of the most common kinds of closure in comics. Our fourth kind is also fairly common, scene to scene. And scene to scene closure takes an even broader leap. It may span, years, planets, worlds, countries, states, great leaps of distance and time, and takes a little bit more thought. There's a lot more that the reader can put into, with their imagination to what happened, between the panels. All right, moving on to page 72. We have what's called aspect to aspect closure. And this one typically bypasses time. Basically, it's not used too much. Generally, it's used in Japanese comics a little bit more to kind of set mood. They don't have to worry about economy as much. They're a little bit more, their country's a little bit more in tune and appreciates, the artist and artwork and creating something beautiful, rather than just the money. So you may see that in Japanese literature, Japanese comics a lot more, manga, whatever you want to call it. And, basically, it like the book says, you may see a bunch of different images that are all related to kind of set a mood, to kind of, get the reader involved in the place and the tone and the emotion and the setting. You don't see it too much in American comics. Maybe see it a little bit in The Crow, but, and not too much elsewhere. Number 6 is called the non sequitur. All right. And you're going to see it the least. It's the least common. I mean, it generally is just a bunch of images that don't seem to be connected, and it's probably going to be used in more experimental comics, so you're not going to see it that much. All right. One thing to think about, comics is, generally we're using our sense of sight to try to influence all the other, senses, to control the other senses. So there's a lot of techniques involved in that the artists use between, different kinds of, font used in type, different kinds of balloon bubbles that the artist uses, in dialogue, different kinds of art style, that type of thing. But anyways, moving on, I think page 84 and 85 might be useful to look at, because one of the concepts is that comic book artists and writers have to think about not only what they're giving you, but what they're leaving out, and the leaps that it takes your mind to make, to fill in those blanks, and what that does to the reader. And there's no really other art form like that that does that. So, that's useful to look at those pages, for that, to kind of an illustration of that idea. Let's see, moving on to chapter 4. We start getting to concepts of how time works in comics. And, generally in comics, you start top left, you move top right, kind of like you read a book. But the interesting thing about comics is the time and how you experience each panel in each story is completely unique to the reader. Your mind may look at the dialogue first, and you may read the dialogue on the whole page. Then you may go back and look at the art on the whole page. Or you may read the dialogue and then look at the art in just that panel. Or you may look at the art first. So it's really up to you. And I think the book does a kind of a good job of illustrating that on the top of page 95 here, where, you kind of have this scene going on at the same time, and you can interpret it as all happening at once, or these things happening in a sequence. But you kind of plug in the time and how you experience all that. And that's a useful section to kind of look over there. The artist can control the time, to a degree, to how you experienced a comic. And this is really page 99 through about 103. And the artist does that through panels, dialogue, narration, content, and shape, and the kinds of closure. So, we see this illustration on page 100, and, we have the same scene over and over again, but with different size panels, different number of panels, different spaces in between the panels, different number of panels before we get the dialogue. And all those things the artist used to control the time, how you experience the comic, to either slow down your reading of it or to speed it up, which, carries different kinds of emotions with it. So that's kind of, interesting. You might want to check that part out and pay close attention to it. There's some other stuff I don't want to spend too much time on. I mean, when you read the comic, you'll see motion lines and things like this, subjective motion, where the Japanese would actually put you in the point of view of the person in the comic, and they have an illustration of riding a motorcycle, and you're from the point of view on the motorcycle, and what that does to the reader, so that's pretty interesting as well. Chapter 5 has to do with panel shape, line shape, and how that affects emotion. These are all things worthy of analyzing as you read comics. What kind of lines did the author use to draw a character? What kind of lines are used in the panel? You'll see when we get to the Crow, sometimes the lines in the panel disappear, and there's background art that bleeds onto the foreground panels. So all these things, even dialogue boxes can come in different shapes to indicate different kinds of emotions. And these are all tools that the artist uses. Now, chapter 6, there was some material that I wanted to really kind of go in with, go in a little bit of explanation. I can't talk. I'm going to explain some stuff in chapter 6, like I know how to speak English. And it's about different categories of combinations of words and art. And there's a relationship there. And these are all kind of terms and ideas that you're probably going to want to use in your essays. And this is page 153. And the first example we get is word-specific combinations, where pictures illustrate the story, but they don't really add a lot of information, to the text. In other words, that's a kind of a fancy way of saying the words are telling their story all on their own, and the pictures aren't really adding a whole lot to it. They're just kind of giving you a little additional information, but the words are the focus. And then you have the complete opposite for your second type, which is picture-specific combinations. And that's where the pictures could tell the story completely on their own, and the words are just giving you a little bit of additional information. These are all pretty common types of combinations of wording and pictures, or words and pictures, narration and pictures, dialogues and pictures, okay? And our third type is duo-specific panels, where the words and the pictures are giving you the exact same information. Like, you could cut either one out and you get the same thing. Number 4 is called additive, and this is page 154. This is an additive. These are, again, categories, combinations of words and pictures. And this is where words amplify or elaborate on an image, or vice versa. Basically, when you add the words to the picture, or when you add the picture to the words, they take on a completely different meaning that the words and the pictures couldn't do on their own. You have to have both for it to really work well. They're kind of dependent on each other. All right, our one of our rare kinds of combinations is parallel combinations, where the words and pictures don't seem to go together at all. You got a story going on with the pictures, and then you got words going on here, and maybe they'll come and they'll make some meaning and meet up later and make a little bit of sense. But you don't see it very often. It typically happens in more experimental stuff. And then the absolutely rarest kind is what you call montage. And the montage is where words are literally part of the picture. You see it in really experimental stuff. Now, the most common type of word-picture combinations is on page 155, and it's called Interdependent, where the words and pictures go hand in hand that neither one could convey on their own. I mean, I know with additive, you kind of have to have them both to make sense, but it's just adding meaning. With interdependence, different, because an interdependent, it just doesn't make any sense without both. It completely changes the meaning. All right, and those are your different, kinds of word and picture combinations. And this is something that the artist and the writer, if the artist and the writer are the same person, they have to find balance. They have to figure out what works best for the emotion, for what they're trying to get the reader to experience. And if you have, situations like where the artist and the writer are separate people, they have to collaborate. They have to come together. And generally, they give the writer gives the artist a script and maybe some notes and a few scribblings or drawings and ideas, and they work together, which is the case with like Harlem Hellfighter and Alan Moore's work, and in 300, is somewhat the case. That's to do more color. Anyways, all right. Now, chapter 7 is just about the steps that it takes, an artist to, how the process of of creating a comic book happens. It's not, 100% necessary for you to know that to understand comics, but, if you're interested in creating art, creating comic books, that's a good one for you as a process. And, the last chapter, isn't something we're going to be dealing with too much this semester, but it's just basically how does society, economy, cost, those type of things affect the comic book, because you always have what an artist and a writer wants to do, and especially here in America where, money is typically a lot of times the bottom line of everything. So basically, cost indicates, what an artist and a writer can and can't do with a comic book. So we're not going to spend that much time talking about that. I mean, we're more looking at the analysis of how things work, what things mean, symbolism, how the artist tries to influence the reader. So that's about it.